So today we are going to have module 9, int model transport, and this is probably the last module which you need for your assignment. Okay. Now, before we actually go through this module, I want to spend just a few minutes on your study, because it's second half of the semester towards the exam period. We have, after today, we have 3 more modules to go, and this is a critical time when you actually needed to actually manage your time properly, so you don't get too much stress. But studying itself is not something very easy. So I certainly understand, that sometimes the stress you feel. You got lots of assignments to do, but an important thing is to manage the time. Now, you probably think about it, say, well, how about I request for extension on your assignment? Well, in only very rare circumstances we actually grant extension. The reason is very obvious, because managing time is part of your study. So even in the workplace, you still need to manage your time and manage your stress. But we try not to put all the assignment on the same day, due on the same day. In your case, I think some of you actually have 2 assignments due on the same day, and one of the assignments already extended. Your law assignment already been extended, right? Now, wherever possible, don't request a further extension, because otherwise you leave too much towards the end, and you will feel stressed, which is not really a good thing. But if you do have any problems, you feel stressed or whatever, you have problems, come to me in this unit, for this unit, or other lectures if you do have problems, because you don't wait until you can't manage the problems anymore. So talk to your lecturers if you need any help, if you have any problems, because your lecturers are there to help you. The lecturers are not there to fail you. They help you to succeed. Always remember this, okay? So if you need help, go to your lecturers or even other people if needed. Okay, don't wait, because we are there to help you. And we need to know your problems before we can offer any help. So this is one thing. The second thing is about your quiz, because you got the results straight away after you completed your quiz. Now, the overall quiz, as I said, well, the overall performance as a class, overall performance, and including those distance students, the overall performance is much better than what we had actually last year. We had high achiever, 90%. 90%, okay? So very high achievement. I have a number of questions with higher failure rate, so which means many students did it wrong. So I'll actually already collect those questions. Now the reason initially I actually planned to actually explain those questions in the class today, but because we still have a couple of students haven't actually completed the quiz yet, so I'll wait until they complete, and then I'll probably spend a few minutes to explain the questions, just for the purpose of you understand if you did it wrong and you understand why you did it wrong. Okay? And I'll probably also explain the logical behind those questions, why you needed to do those questions. Okay? So that's that bit. So the important thing is we are approaching towards the end, and you just need to actually keep going for a little bit longer, and we're done. And as I said, if you have any problems, talk to your lecturers. don't wait. Okay? Yeah? So before we look at module 9, intermodal transport, just to quickly recap what we had last week. Probably you only remember the quiz. No, the quiz is done. It's done. Forget it. You can't change anything. It's done. What about the module we had last week? Huh? What we had?
We looked at hub and spoke and point to point in a bit more detail.
Yeah. Yeah. Hub and spoke system and point-to-point system. What else?
And the four transport system for the water, roads, and the trail and the sea.
Yeah, the whole transport systems, right? Domestic transport systems, global transport systems, and we look at the transport system for each transport mode and correctly combine different transport modes, right?
We looked at transport nodes.
Yeah. Yeah, transport nodes. Okay. Are you alright? Yeah? You good? Yeah.
Compared to road, rail, and air, so rail requires high level of coordination.
Yeah.
And then is air, and then road is mostly loose coordination.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the comparison between different systems in different transport modes. So
How about the C1?
the C1,
Yeah.
sorry?
The maritime one.
Yeah. It's also loosely coordinated, but it's more coordinated than road.
Between air and road.
Yeah. Okay. So this module looks at intermodal transport. Now there are obviously some differences between this module and the module we had last week. Now the focus here is the intermodal transport. And one of the transport processes you need to actually look at it in your assignment is intermodal. So I'll make it very clear. You need to make that point. Okay, so this is one of the differences because you were requested to actually compare and contrast an intermodal of one of the two processes as compared to the other one. So you need to make this this point in your assignment. I'll certainly expect you at least understand the main difference between these two. We have 3 focus questions. As always, we have focus questions, and you should be able to answer after you complete this module. We will cover intermodal transport containerization as part of this, an important element of intermodal, and the efficiency of intermodal transport, which is a part of your assignment. So now you probably come across 2 different terms. One is intermodal, the other one is multimodal transport. Now in some cases, in many areas, or many people actually use these 2 terms actually interchangeably. So they use both terms, but for us, for the purpose of your study, we need to actually differentiate between these 2. So multimodal transport means, well, there are some similarities, obviously. Multimodal or intermodal, they always involve more than one, at least 2 different transport modes before we can call them either multimodal or intermodal. So this is similar, 2 or more transport modes involved in the transport process. But multimodal, although uses multiple transport modes, but also use different rates, freight rates, in different legs, the different legs in this transport process. But intermodal, yes, still use at least two or more transport modes, but only single cargo unit or unit of carriage. the unit of carriage doesn't change right through the process. So if this is a container load, you don't unpack the container in between and consolidate and then move to the next one. This changes the whole thing. This changes the whole thing. So on the single right, so as a shipper, cargo owner, you only deal with one party and you have one right. You only have one right, and you don't care what's happening in between, because you want a right for door to door, and that's finished. Right? You don't want to deal with half dozen of different operators, and you pay 6 bills. Now this is different from multimodal transport. It's likely that you have to deal with multiple operators and pay multiple bills. That's why we needed to differentiate these two. So why intermodal? Why intermodal? Well, there are good reasons for it. Well, for one thing, we have competition between transport modes. Right? We understand transport modes actually compete with each other for freight, but also for investment. Now, within a country, even within, look at Australia, what's happening in Australia. Now, transport mode actually compete with each other for investment, and you will consider, how can this possible? Well, it's possible because from high level, when decisions make for investment into certain areas, well, there are lots of reasons behind for that investment decisions. But the resources, financial resources and other resources are always limited. So if we invest more into road infrastructure, there will be less left for rail, for example, just for the land transport side. Now, intermodal means we actually don't look at a single transport mode. We look at the transport system, the combination of all transport modes as one. So the consideration will be even higher level for the benefits of the whole system, not individual transport mode. So this is part of the reason. We still need a competition, but we also need to make the best use of the investment we put into infrastructure. And the second main reason is business operation. Well, this is from, we just mentioned. Well, for businesses, what you want is simplify the process, the transaction, the relationship with your clients. So when it comes to transport, what you want to do is a single point of contact. And you don't want to deal with by yourself with multiple operators in between. So simplified business operations and leave those complicated process to, for example, freight forwarders. They will look after your business. So make it much simpler. And then we have the second point here, the lack of integration among transport modes. Now, this can be caused by public policy. For example, companies are barred from owning firms in other modes. What that mean? Well, in Australia, was the case when businesses are only allowed to operate in one transport mode. So if you are operating in the road sector, you are not allowed to own or operate in the rail, for example. And you would think, well, this is weird. Why you can't operate in both transport mode? And that was exactly the reason why this being actually removed, those barriers being removed. So operators can possibly operate across different transport modes. But still, the policy level will still look after the competition level. So it's a balance between competition level and also the efficiency level. Well, because if we allow those very larger operators to control larger portion of the infrastructure or the operation, transport operations, then we end up with what? If we have very extremely large operators and they have very high level of control over transport operations, what would be the result? Just think about this, well, the airlines industry. If we have extremely large operators, the airlines, and they pretty much dominated the market, what's the consequence? Monopoly, absolutely. So we don't want monopoly. Yes, they're operating across a wider range Yes, that's efficiency, right, for the operator. But eventually, when it reaches to certain level, it becomes monopoly. Then the outcome would be damage to the consumers because we have reduced the competition level. Got that point? So the policy level need to maintain the efficiency and the competition level, the competition. And then transferability between transport modes. Now this is to do the infrastructure, obviously the hardware, the infrastructure, whether we have the infrastructure, the equipment facilities to deal with the cargoes, handle cargoes across different transport modes. Now this is obvious, and this is something you probably also want to mention in your assignment. But this is the hardware, the thing that you can actually see, but there are also things that you can't see. That's the practices, right? The way you do certain things. So this is things that are invisible but very important if we involve different transport modes. And then we have technology. Once again, we don't normally see them, but they are there, they are very important. And this is together with the transferability, the second point, right? So for example, information sharing. How we share information across different operators and operators in different transport modes. Now, it's not something that we can take for granted because they're not necessarily sharing necessary information in order to improve the overall process. But if we say we have to use intermodal, and then eventually they say, well, we need to work together for better so that we can actually provide the necessary service for the customers. And also, the next point, door-to-door services. Now this is actually a requirement now. So instead of multiple legs managed by shippers, well, this is gonna be door-to-door service. So with door-to-door service, how can you achieve this? We understand which transport mode has the capacity to deliver door-to-door services. Roads, right? So how about rail and then other transport modes? They can't. They have to rely on road. So at least in any case, if we are asking for door-to-door service, road transport will be always part of it. And then if you choose in between the long distance rail or other means of transport, then you already involve 2 or even more transport modes. So if we are requiring door-to-door service, we have to actually use intermodal. We always say, well, for intermodal transport, there are 2 key elements. The first one is the transferability, and this has been pretty much achieved by containerization. So containerization, you will come to this term in other units in your course. So we just very quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time here. So containerization is that we actually use standard unit. Now this is not a single unit. There are actually different measurement, different container sizes, but they start standard, which means if we're talking about this 40-foot containers, normal, general purpose 40-foot containers, we expect this is the size. If we're talking about 40-foot container hard cube, as we're called, we understand the height is higher, is 9 foot and 6 inch as compared to the 8 feet 6 inch. So we can expect the size, the external measurement, not the internal. The internal measurement could be different. So why we need this? What's the benefit of this? What's the benefit of we have standard units? Can you give me some benefits of this?
It's faster loading and unloading.
Faster loading and unloading if we are handling the whole container, right?
Yeah.
What else?
Saving the space.
Saving the space. Saving the space of what? What space?
Like for the general cargo, if like ships, if not ships like the containerization, there will some space are not efficiently being used.
Yeah, there will be space wasted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not even just in ships, but also the shore side as well. You can't stack pallets, say 5 high, 5 pallets on top of each other, but you can stack containers, 5 containers on top of each other, no problem. You can stack even high, much higher, if you have the facility. What else? From what we have actually covered so far this semester, what else you can think of?
Quick transport from like truck to train to ship.
Yep, so that's very fast transfer across different modes. Yes, that's very important. What else? What else?
It's secure.
Yeah, secure. Because containers, once they finish loading, they actually locked and sealed. What else?
Simplifying the documents as well is one of the management.
Yeah, that's a very important point. It's a simplified documentation. So you possibly have 20 different stuff in one container, but you have one document.
Once it's been sealed and like from a standalone after customs quickly.
Yes. Yep.
That's like strong.
What else?
Consolidation of cargoes of 3 cargoes into 1 unit.
Yeah, so that's the time saving for the handling, right? Yeah. So we actually got quite a lot. Those advantages, or those the strengths of using containers. So we have those. Now the speed we mentioned, and the cost side. This is as a result of increased efficiency, because we reduce the shipping costs through rapid transshipment, and also economy of scale, and reduced insurance costs because it's secure. Back to the speed, containers handled more quickly, more easily, reducing loading unloading time. So this can be just from within one transport mode. It can be across different transport mode, but also because we have standardized containers, so we can design and construct those facilities in that way to handle those standardized units. And also product packaging. For one thing, we can reduce the packaging requirement if we are shipping those products in containers. For the other, we can design those packaging so that we can maximize the space within containers. So those manufacturers, when they design their packages, they consider how they design the packages so that they can actually fully utilize the space within containers. So all related. And then also another thing is because we have a unique identity for each container, so we can actually make containers visible in the system. We can track them, we can monitor them, and even with the technology we have today, we can actually provide real-time tracking information. And warehousing, we don't need to have sheltered areas, but for general cargoes, many general cargoes, we have to provide warehouses or sheltered areas. But for containers, we don't. It's weather proof. Security, yes, we mentioned. Documentation simplified. But we have some drawbacks. Now, before I move to that one, think about the weaknesses. Well, yes, we have lots of benefits brought by containerizations, but there are some weaknesses. What are some weaknesses we have?
Empty containers.
Why we have empty containers?
Imbalance trade.
Yep, imbalance the trade. Well, it's not difficult to find out the trade flow. So you can use Australia, for example. We have actually more containerized cargoes than the containerized cargoes actually shipped out of Australia, which means we always have surplus of empty containers in Australia. Now, for those empty containers, you have to move the containers to somewhere, right? You can't keep the empty containers here, because containers are very important assets to shipping companies or to container providers. They are providers of containers. Not necessarily all the containers owned by shipping companies, but containers are very important and expensive assets. If you don't use the assets, you are wasting your money.
When we had that chat here earlier in the year, the guy from Tas Ports was saying that over half of the trade going from Tasmania to Melbourne is just empty containers.
Yeah, that's right. So half, you see. And then, if we look at more in detail, if we look at the refrigerated containers, probably we have not enough refrigerated containers from Tasmania to mainland. That's another interesting thing. This is actually because the trade we have from Tasmania to mainland or to overseas. So we can look at the main trade regions. So we can look at it between Asia and North America, and between North America and Europe, and you see what's the imbalance or the balance of trade, and therefore the empty containers or the movement of empty containers, and this is a cost factor. What else?
We mentioned before in class, the safety issue, the container is sealed and some hazards inside and the shippers never know.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting point. Now, we have security as an advantage because they sealed, right? So less of pilferage. But then this is also a weakness because it's sealed, so you don't know what's inside.
Probably you need specialized equipment to leave it, which is expensive.
Yeah, well that's the point. Now we say, well, the advantage is we can actually design, construct those facilities, equipment to handle those standardized units, but it's also a weakness because the investment into those facility equipment could be extremely expensive. So the space, consumption of space, container storage, etc., those are considered as a weakness. But if we compare with those loosely packed pallets, those general cargoes, still we're saving space. But because of volume, we need to have very large areas, either in terminals or somewhere else. So we require those space. And the infrastructure cost is extremely expensive. Construction of the terminals and even those ships, very expensive, much more expensive than those bulk ships or general cargo ships. Security concern, because we don't know what's inside, so it could be used for lots of illegal purposes, and then empty travel as a result of imbalanced trade, which we mentioned already. Now, containerization, what are the impacts? And some of those actually we mentioned already in previous module. So we understand the impact here, specialization, well, because they are standard unit. They're specialized, right? Specialized and used for that particular purposes. So because it's specialized, we have the efficiency. But also specialization has impact on ships and on terminals because they're standardized, so we need to actually construct those ships specialized to carry containers. And also growing container ship sizes. Right? We back a few weeks ago we mentioned in the tutorial session we mentioned the larger crane ordered into Australia ports, Fremantle, Brisbane, Sydney, right? And they're very expensive. They're very expensive. The reason for the upgrade is because we have increasing size of those ships, and the existing facility no longer capable of handling those larger ships. Speed means we have those ever increasing size ships, and we require faster movement of containers. And the larger the ship, the larger the volume, but the larger the ship, the more expensive every hour those ships are spent in ports. So require very faster movement of containers, either loading or unloading in ports. So put lots of pressure on the shore side. Shipbuilding costs, as I mentioned, they are very expensive to build. Easily over $150 million or reach to $200 million for each, those larger container ships. Seafarers, well, this is another problem. This is probably a social problem. This is more to do with the reducing number of crew members on those very efficient ships, because the purpose of those specialized ships is to save cost. And the labor cost in shipping is one of the main costs, and the shipping companies always try to reduce that cost. And a part of the practice is to reduce the number of crew members on ships to the minimum. They still need to meet the minimum requirement set by the International Maritime Organization. But because they're so efficient, so they can reduce the number to minimum. And with a very small number of people working on the ship, staying on the ship for more than 20, sometimes up to 30 days without actually interacting with others. So it could be a social problem. Any question? Now talking about the seafarers, if you are interested in this one, I have a book published last year about seafarers. Everything about seafarers, right from the recruitment, training, retention, everything, social problems. So you can actually find in the probably in the library and probably online. The name of this is Managing Human Resources in Shipping. Okay, so if you want to know anything about seafarers, go for that book. You got everything about seafarers. The impact of containerization on shipping, once again, we touched some of those previously already. In terms of shipping service, we obviously have improved reliability because we're talking about those line services. So they're pretty much like buses. You can expect, they have published a timetable, so you can expect the time, and then most of the time they're accurate, they're reliable. And also frequency. Well, frequency sometimes could be a problem, like we discussed in the tutorial session. Always frequency, high frequency is a good thing for you as a shipper, right? So you have cargo, you have containers, and you want to move the containers, so the higher the frequency, the better. But providing high frequency is something, a cost factor for the shipping service providers. Now, if they can't justify the volume, they probably reduce the frequency. Now, this is the same for even for the airline industry. So you can't expect very frequent services because you want the convenience. But if the operator do not have the occupancy level, they don't provide the service. Okay. So you need to look at it from two sides. But for the shipping, a balance between the service level, which means the frequency level, and also profitability, means they need to have the traffic to justify providing the services. Route selection. Well, we understand that with containerization, container shipping, we have the timetable, we have the routes, right? So it's like pretty much like in the bus services. You have bus numbers, and for one bus number you have one route, and they always have the predetermined stops, right? For shipping, exactly the same thing. They have predetermined stops. They will visit those ports at a given time. But how are those routes initially determined, selected? Well, there are lots of reasons behind. One of those things is cargo availability. But remember, we're talking about hinterland, right? The concept of hinterland and the foreland. Now, you need to consider those as well. And also, it could be about negotiating the rate. Because if you are a shipping operator, what you want is cheaper price, cheaper cost from charged by those terminals, right? So you negotiate the rates. If you are big enough, powerful enough, you probably can negotiate a better price. So this is part of the consideration. But for many shipping lines, shipping operators, this is probably not possible, especially when face very larger operators. Quality and cost of port services. So you also need to balance between what's the cost. You want to save cost as a shipping operator, but also at the same time you need to think about your port service. Port service, one of the port service here is how fast the loading and unloading can be done. So sometimes you pay more, but it's faster, so you still save money. But you pay less, probably you have slower and probably poor services. And then the network. The network is the forward hinterland mentioned. So we have the hinterland, and then we have the mirror side, the ocean side of it, and that's the network. So you can, just for an example, you can follow the link and find out what networks provided by Maersk, the largest container shipping companies in the world. So they have network between those larger ports. They have also feed routes as well. So do spend some time and find out what the networks look like. So we just look at the impacts of containerization on shipping, and we need to also look at the impact on ports. Once again, some of those are already been covered, so I'll just quickly run through. Cargo handling equipment we already mentioned. With containerization, we need to have specialized equipment to handle containers. Now, once again, what I want to make, a point I want to make here is we can't take it for granted. Yes, containerization requires specialized equipment to handle containers. But in many ports around the world simply do not have that means to provide that specialized equipment. So sometimes you still find in some ports containers are handled by those conventional, those old, very old traditional, those cranes. They're not designed for handling containers, but still before they can afford for specialized equipment, they use those very primitive handling equipment. Those equipment used to handle general cargoes. And you can expect that the speed will be much slower. Storage. Well, we need to provide very larger storage area for containers simply because, not because it's not efficient. In fact, we can make it very, very efficient because we can stack very high those containers within the yard. But because we have very large ships, so the traffic volume actually becomes much, much greater as compared previously when we actually dealt with general cargoes. So we need to provide very large area, although the technology actually evolving to actually reduce the time, storage time, because any time spent in the storage is counterproductive and will create a double handling. So ideally, what's the best scenario for us to handle containers in terms of we reduce the storage, reduce the handling time and the cost. What's the ideal scenario in a shipping situation in ports?
You take a container off one ship and straight onto the next. That's ideal.
Yeah. So if this is a transshipment, let's imagine if we go via Singapore transshipment. So ideally, we unload the containers from one ship, and then, of course, will be moved on the shore side and to the next ship, loaded straight away. Ideal, right? Now, if this is not transshipment, if this is a destination, ideally it would be unload the container to a truck or rail and carry the container straight away, right? Without storing the container in the yard, ideally, right? And vice versa, if we are talking about loading process, ideally would be trucks or train coming in, unload containers from trucks or train, and load onto ships straight away, right? Ideally. So without actually stopping or storing the containers in the yard, right? Now, we're moving towards that one. Compared to years ago, container terminals are much better now to actually to manage this process. So reduce the time for storage or even reduce the need for storage. Now this is through technology. Right? So when you probably in the next couple of years, as you study this course, and you probably come across some papers talking about terminal port terminal management, and you do have a unit there, and you come across some studies about optimization. Now this is the term, optimization, which means we reduce unnecessary movement. Any single movement by any equipment will be a cost factor. Okay. Port traffic. Now with specialization, we have concentration of traffic in those larger ports. And also we have very much single purpose for those terminals. Because they're designed in such a way that will handle that specific traffic in the most efficient way and the most effective way. Emergence of new container terminals. We find actually many new terminals actually emerge after containerization, as I mentioned. How old actually containerization is? How many years? For shipping, it's 1,000 years of history. Bulk shipping, general cargo shipping, 100,000 years. Once again, we start from very humble beginning. But for containerization, how many years of history?
50, 60 years.
Yeah. So it's very young. And with the young history, you can find lots of completely new terminals designed and constructed for handling containers, and they are very large. Hub or feeder. This is once again very important feature of containerization, container shipping. This is not just for the shipping side, the ocean side, but also the land side, the same thing. We have that system because that makes the whole thing very efficient. New forms of competition. So the competition is not just geographically, but rather it's through the network. So I think I mentioned a couple of times in terms of competition between ports, container terminals. So sometimes we can't understand why possibly Hong Kong can compete with Singapore because they're far from each other, or between Shanghai and Singapore. You would think, well, these two should not be competing with each other, but to some extent they do. Not necessarily, well, Shenzhen port will compete with Hong Kong because they're very close to each other. Well, yes, they compete with each other. But even further, Shanghai will compete with Hong Kong or even Singapore, because we look at the whole thing as a network. And security. Now, security probably it's more on we remember the weakness of containerization. So the security now is not just a matter of the responsibility of individual operators. Now think about your travel. Now, if you are traveling from Launceston to London, right? So you have your luggage, you check it in here, and most likely you don't need to take it out in Melbourne or Sydney before you fly to London via Singapore or via Dubai, right? Now, if someone wants to do something bad, and they can start from Launceston, right? Do something in Launceston, and that luggage checked in will be all through to London. And you would think, say, well, in Launceston, well, the security screening will not as strict as in large airports. You agree? So if we want to maintain the security level, we start from Launceston, right? A very small local airport. We don't start from Melbourne or Sydney. Now, same thing for shipping, for container shipping. A container can be loaded in a small factory, probably a couple of thousand kilometers away from the actual seaport, and route through road transport, rail transport, or inland water transport before reaching the seaport for the long journey. And where the security starts? Where the security starts? What do you think? Now, in that case, where do we start actually looking after security?
At the warehouse?
Yes, in the warehouse. Well, pretty much in the premises of that small factory when you actually start loading it, right? Start from that point on and route through. So this is a very challenging task. Okay, as compare, you load the cargoes from the seaport. So you look after the security from that point. So you increase the distance and the scope of the security issue. Okay? I'll stop here and let's have 10 minutes of break. Come back 11. Okay, guys. We're back to the class. Now we just had the first important element, key element, which is the containerization. And the second key element of intermodal transport is the door-to-door service. We have a few obstacles. Although we would think, well, it's not so difficult to provide door-to-door services, just simply get a couple of different transport modes involved and bring all the operators together, and that's it. No, as a matter of fact, this is not that straightforward. Even domestically, well, this becomes even more complicated if we go international. Even within domestic, we still have challenges to actually provide that service. So the first thing is about regulation, and there are regulations that actually prevent the ownership across different transport modes, which are mentioned already. Although we had in many countries already experienced what we call the deregulation, which means simply remove those barriers that actually previously had, and allow the ownership, in this case, allowed the ownership of ownership of infrastructure operations across different transport modes. So this actually is certainly a good thing for providing door-to-door services. And also another issue here is private ownership of certain infrastructure. In the rail sector, very obvious. For road transport, it's not issue, right? Private ownership of certain infrastructure. But it can be a bigger problem for rail transport. Now, what's the possible problem if we have private ownership of railway infrastructure? Now, in this particular context, we're talking about the whole transport process from point A to point B, and in the middle we've got lots of operations. You guys all right? Yeah? No questions?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So for rail transport, what are the possible problems if we have private ownership? If for rail networks from one place to another, and we have multiple operators owning different sections of the network, what do you think? No, for road, because we probably, in our daily life, we probably don't experience this kind of problems. For road transport, when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about the roads, right? So we probably have those tolled road, which means we have to pay in order for us to use that road. But we still can use that road. But for most part of road network, at least in Australia, we don't pay, right? It's a public infrastructure. So most of the infrastructure, road infrastructure, we don't pay. But for rail, when it comes to private ownership, and especially when we have multiple private ownership across a rail network. Now the problem here is you can't assume all the owners of that network will agree with all the operations in terms of the flight right, in terms of how they actually allow the traffic, etc., the timetabling, those kind of things. Not necessarily straightforward, easy thing that all the owners would agree. Now this is a problem. And without agreement, how can you actually use the whole network as just as one system? You can't. Because although infrastructure physically, well, that's connected, this is one system, but the ownership will possibly create lots of problems. So that's the regulation side. Control over transport pricing. Now this is to do with the ownership, and also the pricing here means, well, the regulation can say have certain regulation to put a cap, either a cap, higher or low. This will affect the cost of that service. And this is actually mainly created. It's not unnecessary. It's not market-driven. Now, for most of the case, well, how the process actually be determined. And in road transport, we understand how the process is actually determined for road transport. You remember the market structure of road transport? Now, we always think about when we talk about the process, we think about the demand and the supply, right? For road transport, for the supply side, what's the situation? How many operators we have in the road transport sector can actually provide trucking service, for example, transport service? Yeah, so very large number of operators and high level of competition, right? And therefore the price will be determined by the operators. So we have a class full of operators. You're all operating trucking service. And then when you say, well, determined by operator, so you have a trucking company, you say you want charge, say, well, $20 per parcel, and the other one say, well, no, I want that business, so I'm provided $19, so $1 cheaper. So for that case, when we have high level of competition, we have large number of operators in that sector, the price will be determined by the market, the competition level. But in a monopoly position, or another word, if we have much smaller number, limited number, not two, but a very limited number of operators, what we call it? After monopoly, what another term? Yes? So, which means we have limited number of those operators. So the pricing, one thing is the relationship between the supply and the demand side, but also we have a third element here, which is the regulation. So sometimes regulations actually encourage improvement in efficiency, but sometimes bad regulations actually create inefficiency. Okay? So, and then if we look at internationally, well, obviously countries have different laws and regulations, and this problem actually becomes much more complicated. I mentioned the deregulation, so it's a good thing. Deregulation, many developed countries already gone through this process, deregulation, because those countries found that actually over-regulation actually created inefficiency. So therefore, they remove those over-regulations, remove those barriers to make the whole thing much more efficient, high level of competition, and it will incentive for operators to invest into innovation or invest into improving infrastructure, equipment, etc. But there should be benefits behind incentive. That's what we call. Now, for businesses, what's the incentive? For businesses, if you are a business, what's the incentive for you to actually put money into something, into a new truck or something, new infrastructure? If you own or you actually have a lease of a section of road infrastructure, what's the incentive for you to put money into the infrastructure?
Higher returns.
High return.
Yeah,
yes.
So then get money back out.
Yeah, absolutely. You have the potential to actually not just recover your investment, but have very decent return. Right? So deregulation, this is a part of it. Because business don't invest or do things for nothing, they're for something. So we need to have the right regulation or right laws to encourage either private or even sometimes even public operators to actually invest in the infrastructure or other facilities. Legal and technical obstacles, allocation of liability in case of loss or damage. Now, when we're talking about, say, well, we have multiple, possibly half a dozen of operators between one point to another, and in the process we have those multiple operators, and we mentioned already intermodal, we have one single bill. But this is about the how you actually pay, how much you pay. But another thing we haven't actually mentioned here, what happens if your product or your product gets damaged in between? Who is going to be responsible for it? You don't want, as a shipper, you don't want to chase everyone and find out, okay, well, you are responsible for the damage or for the loss. Well, so this actually becomes very complicated, and you have law, transport law, right? And you will cover that part. It's not a single, easy, straightforward process in terms of the liability of loss or damage. Accuracy and the speed of documentation. Now, this is actually being improved significantly because of the information technology we use. So we have reduced the intervention from human being. Now, because the error always from human being. When we input things into the system initially, we can make mistakes, and the more we have human intervention in the process, the more errors we possibly get. Because the machine will not create problems if the software is right? So, once again, the accuracy and speed of documentation with the information technology we have today, this being very much improved. But we're not saying that it's perfect. It's not perfect. That's why we continue on with the development. We are moving towards possibly in the future blockchains. Once again, it's a completely different thing. Connection between land and the sea. So we have competition between rail and the road. We discussed that before. Extension of shipping service from sea to land, inland. And you would think, so, well, for shipping companies, what's the point for them to move from sea to the land? Well, there are lots of reasons. Because vertically, when we say vertically means, well, it's a line from the beginning to the end, and you're doing that service, right? But different. So shipping is a part of that. But if you're moving upwards, that's the source of the cargo, the original. So you move from the seaside to the port operation, and then possibly the land transport side, and then you move to even further to the initial, the packaging. And you find that lots of shipping companies actually already moved from sea or expand from the seaside only to the land operation. The reason is they can have much control over the whole process, and also the source of traffic, because the more cargo you have secure, you can secure, the better. And by operating, extending your operation into the shore side, you have that control. And then this is certainly good for door-to-door service. Any questions? Okay, now we move to the next one, efficiency of intermodal transport. Now before we talk about the efficiency, we need to understand the process. So in the tutorial already, we look at the two cases, right? Start from the starting point right to the end, but we haven't done in detail is actually who actually involved in that process. Who are the main players in this process? Because I mentioned, well, in one transport process from the beginning to the end, it could involve many different operators. Okay, so it can be shipping, rail, road, air, and those terminals, distribution centers, and probably more. Who else could be involved? Shipping operators, rail operators, road, air, terminal, distribution centers. Who else possibly be involved? Who else? We're missing someone very important here.
Freight forwarders?
Yes. Yes. And can be more, because if we talk about fresh produce for export, we have quarantine, and because it's involved international trade, it could be customer clearance, etc. So there will be more involved. So you need to understand along the whole process who are the key players and how they can possibly affect the efficiency of the process. This is from a different angle when you discuss what are the factors affecting the efficiency and the cost effectiveness, right? From different angles. So you can look at it from the overall transport process, the main points, the nodes as we mentioned. It can be looked at through the main players, so how the operators, how they actually affect negatively or positively. And then another question we always ask is, yes, given that we have multiple operators involved in the same process, who actually in charge? They need someone actually take responsibilities or coordinating the whole thing. And then once again, we have those shipping companies, because they actually responsible for the long distance movement, right? The longest probably distance. And the rail operators, or it could be in terms of air transport, we have those air flight operators, because they are responsible for the longest journey during the transport process. And then we have trucking companies, we have terminal operators, we have freight forwarders. So who actually is responsible, or who is in charge of the whole process? Well, we probably don't have a definite answer, but then in many cases we find actually freight forwarders although they don't own any infrastructure or any physical assets, but they are actually very important in a sense they coordinating, organizing different things. But then also sometimes we have shipping companies or those operators, actually they take responsibility for the whole process. They work with others, other providers, and they provide a package of services. So the answer to this question could be different, but we need to understand for any transport process, there will be a party coordinating the whole thing, and that's the key for door-to-door services. Otherwise, you have as a shipper, you have to deal with multiple operators. Okay. And then another thing here is because one of the key elements when you discuss the efficiency and cost effectiveness is the infrastructure. We have really good infrastructure, we have bad infrastructure, and the condition of the infrastructure or the adequacy of the infrastructure will affect your cost, right? But the question here is, who is responsible for that infrastructure? Well, once again, we have different situations. Well, it can be from the owner who owns the infrastructure, should invest into it, and it could be federal or local government, and it could be private. And also we have the operator. So there could be separation between an operator and an owner. Do you understand the difference? So for a port, the owner of that port can be different from the operator. And this is very common. Now when we have this situation, who is going to invest in the infrastructure? Right? Some people say, well, the owner should invest into the infrastructure. Some say, well, the operator.
Maybe both of them should work together.
Well, they definitely need to work together, and eventually who invests into it depending on the deal. If you're an operator, you are leasing that infrastructure, and when you are asked to invest into it, or sometimes you are incentivized to invest because you have the benefits, right? So once again, we look at who actually has the benefit of investment. And this is normally long term. Okay? So if you look at it just a couple of years or 5 years, well, you don't even think about investment into infrastructure, because the return period will be very, very long. It's different from just to say, okay, well, I'll spend money, I'll purchase a truck. The return period is much shorter than you invest into a road infrastructure. Okay? And then we say, well, invisible hands. Well, information technologies, for example, most of the time you don't see them, but they are there, they're everywhere. So we can just use some of those compatibility. Well, yes, we have those technologies, but not necessarily will they talk to each other. Some part of the problem when we have the technologies, especially the softwares we use, not necessarily they talk to each other very well, right? Now the reason we have blockchain at the moment is because we have if we're using blockchain, well, that's the concept, that's the design. If we are part of it, well, that's pretty much compatible across. Now if this is within certain area. Now of course blockchains can be in the banking sector, it can be in the shipping, right? And it can be actually connected between banking and shipping, because there will be financial transactions. But the compatibility can be a problem here. So we have intra and internet. So internet, that's within an organization, within an institution, and then we have internet. It's global. Well, we have those technologies, say EDI or barcode, very old. Well, but somehow we still use it, barcode. And we have the radio frequency RD. We have the GPS and probably GIS system to provide the tracking services and a combination of different technologies. Accuracy, I mentioned already, the less the human intervention in the process, the higher the accuracy level. Security, well, that's a concern. If we very much rely on or too much rely on technology, well, when the technology works, it's good. But if it doesn't work, well, we have a bigger problem. So we always need to have the backup, the contingency plan if the technology stops working. And also security in terms of who actually has the access and what level of access. We're talking about the accuracy. Now, accuracy depends on the initial input, right? How you actually provide the initial information. But also, the accuracy only can be maintained if there is no actual changes made to the initially the accurate information. No one actually will deliberately do something to the information in the system. So that's why we needed to have a level of access. Communication. Now this is something probably we don't consider at all, and probably if somehow you can actually include this in your assignment, I don't need to say, well, a bigger paragraph to discuss this, but it's a part of it. How actually you communicate, and especially communication between different transport modes in this process, it's a part of it. Because we talk about coordination across different operators and between different transport or among different transport modes. Now this is eventually goes down to communication. Without communication, you don't have any coordination. Culture. Now, culture also relates to communication. Well, people in different culture will understand the same thing differently. Now, this is something in the business world you have to consider. Okay? Challenges ahead. So, organizational integration. Organizational integration can be a challenge. Integration, especially across different organizations, not just within. Even within, we still have problems, still have challenges within intra-organizational integration. We have challenges. Let alone we have inter-organizational integration. So we have infrastructure versus organizational. Organizational, we can call it as a soft integration. Infrastructure integration is hard integration. This is the physical part of it. And then we have regional differences, regulatory regimes, market differences, standardizations, etc. Competition versus oligopoly or monopoly. So we have those very large consortia, those mega carriers. In terms of the transport providers, it can be shipping, it can be on the land side, and then we have those operators. So I briefly mentioned the negotiation between shipping lines and the operators. And if you go further, and I'm sure in other units you will come across that part. So we have those actually carriers very large, like Maersk, extremely large. So they have the power to negotiate the good rights with the ports. But those operators, terminal operators, they don't just wait, right? They also form alliances and they also expand. So we have those global player operators that are extremely large. So it's a balanced power when they negotiate. The need for collaboration. Yes, they compete. They compete because they operate. There are lots of operators. They have limited freight, and each one wants to get more. But then eventually, to provide the whole service, entire service for the clients, they need to cooperate. So they make the best use of what they have collectively. So that's why you have heard from your air travel code sharing, right? Why you have code sharing? Because the airlines actually work with each other. They together, they use each other's capacity to maximize the utilization, the space utilization. So they increase the profit to reduce the cost. In shipping, the same thing. They have sharing, called pooling, right? So which means they actually pool the resources together and improve the utilization. And that's pretty much we have for this module. Any questions? Any questions for your assignments? No? Good? All right. See you next week.